Well, at this point, there's 8 lawsuits. 2 of them were filed by minors, young women who had been molested as minors by P. Diddy. And he also talked about P. Diddy's homes being wired for audiovisual blackmail, and other people have talked about that too. What we're seeing is kind of a Franklin scandal, Epstein scandal, Holmes scandal.
I agree. All right, so lateraling into the modern era, if you will, we're into 2024. I can't believe I'm about to say this word, but P. Diddy. I can't say it more than once. It's so ridiculous. So I'm just going to say Sean or Mr. Combs afterwards. He has been in the news. His homes were raided by Homeland Security officials. And I'm curious if you could just bring us up to speed on what you know or what you've been able to discover about those things.
Well, at this point, there's 8 lawsuits pending against. Should we call him Diddy, Puffy, Combs?
I mean, I just I can't do Diddy. Let's call him Sean. Let's just go first.
Look, well, let's go with Combs.
Combs it is.
I just don't feel right calling him Sean. Let's go with Combs. Okay.
Combs it is.
So there are 8 lawsuits pending against Combs. And 2 of them were filed by minors girls who had been molested, young women who had been molested as minors by P. Diddy. And one of them was filed by Little Rod, and he had been a producer for P. Diddy. And he said that there were all kinds of minors that were being trafficked by P. Diddy. And he also talked about P. Diddy's homes being wired for audiovisual blackmail, and other people have talked about that too. And what we're seeing is kind of a Franklin scandal, Epstein scandal, Holmes scandal. And we're going to see a cover up here. And I'll tell you why. Because Combs is being prosecuted by Andre Damian Williams, Jr. out of the Southern District of New York City. And the Southern District of New York, the U.S. attorneys from the Southern District are considered to be the most powerful law enforcement officials in New York. And it's kind of interesting. Those search warrants emanated from the Southern District of New York, even though they were executed in LA and also Miami. I mean, Now a lot of people would say, well, you know, that's kind of strange, but not me, because I knew who those search warrants were emanating from. And it was Andre Damian Williams. He was the guy who covered up Epstein. William Barr played an integral role in covering up Epstein, Trump's attorney general, by only indicting Maxwell. And then when it was handed off to the Democrats, they only called 4 witnesses in that trial. And those 4 witnesses had only exclusively been molested by Epstein and Maxwell. And at that point, the feds had a list of at least 30 victims, actually more than 30. I've got the list, and they had a list of more than 30 victims. And they that was a very carefully choreographed trial to make sure that none of the procurers and none of the perpetrators were named. And if there was real justice going on here, it would have been like a RICO prosecution, where the procurers would have been indicted on multiple counts of child trafficking. The New York Times wrote an article about 6 procurers. I mean, it's not like we don't know who they are. And some of them even confessed to being procurers for that New York Times article. So if we were going to have real justice here, and child trafficking is a heavy sentence. It's 15 to life. And if we're going to have real justice, those procurers would have been hammered with multiple counts of child trafficking. They'd be looking at 1,000 years, and they'd roll over on the perps. That's how the mafia was taken down, or much of the mafia was taken down. But we did not see that in this case. As I said, it was a carefully choreographed trial. And Damian Williams oversaw that carefully choreographed trial, and now he's overseeing the P. the Combs case.
Yeah. So I had read a report that there were hundreds of video cameras in his home. I'm assuming there is audio associated with that. Can you think of I mean, I was going to say, can you think of a reasonable explanation to have that? I guess in the back of my mind, I could say, all right, he's a celebrity. He's somebody who is maybe potentially worried about liability. Maybe he wants to, he'll pitch it under the guise of I'm protecting myself by recording everything that's going on. But then the other conspiratorial side of me is, well, that's exactly how Epstein was doing it. So therefore everything was cataloged and they had leverage on people. Which one do you think is more plausible? Or is there even a reason to have that level of audio video recording in a home?
Well, what people thought initially about Combs was that it was just rappers that went to his party. He would have what was called the freak-off parties, and it was thought that it was just rappers. But actually, there were politicians and big-time athletes going to those parties, people that you would want to compromise. And it was strange that Homeland Security executed that search warrant, because usually it's the FBI that execute. Now, Homeland Security does have an anti-trafficking section, so you could make an argument for that. But when you go back and you look at Combs' history, in 1993, he started Bad Boy Records with a guy named Clive Davis. Mm-hmm. And Clive Davis is about as dirty as they come. There was a documentary made about Clive Davis that showed him to be this benign octogenarian. But it was just basically a propaganda infomercial. Clive Davis is a nasty piece of work. But here's what's interesting about Clive Davis. In the 70s, he was busted for filing false tax returns and also defrauding the IRS. And then he was busted in the biggest payola scam ever. And payola is when record companies give money to disc jockeys and radio stations to play their songs. But that wasn't the crescendo. Was there was a Genovese guy named Pasquale Falcone who was busted smuggling 22 pounds of heroin into the United States. And the feds started digging into Falcone, and they came across all these dummy companies that him and Clive Davis had set up. And at that point, Clive Davis was the head of CBS Records, and he was invoicing these these false. Sorry about that, allergies. He was invoicing these shell companies, and then getting kickbacks, and then he would take a cut, and then Falcone would take a cut. And you want to know what happened to Clive Davis after all those felonies? I've given you about 8 felonies, 9 felonies, 10 felonies. It all depends upon how the feds wanted to prosecute it. Clive Davis did not spend one day in jail. Not one day. And he's the guy that took P. Diddy by the hand and started to walk down the yellow brick road.